30 years ago, in the summer of 1957, two noteworthy events occurred. One, I attended KU orientation, and two, KU installed its first computer system. Neither of these events were noteworthy to everyone. However, Dr. G. Baley Price was an important part of both. As a math major, Dr. Price was my departmental chairman. Even at that time, Dr. Price had a reputation as an innovator and as an excellent teacher. Among other courses, he taught the honors calculus course for freshmen, and as I've discovered today, on inquiry, he was responsible for the creation of the honors program in the mathematics department. Dr. Price played an extremely important role in the creation of the KU Computer Center. And I talked with him about 5 years ago on our 25th anniversary, and he provided an article for our newsletter. I was not aware until today, and Dr. Price has presented us with a gift. The gift is the History of the Mathematics, Department of Mathematics, University of Kansas, 1866 to 1970, which Dr. Price has written. And this includes a large section on the creation of the computer center in the 1950s. Now Dr. Price is playing a pivotal role in the establishment of another computer center. This time it's the KU Retired Faculty or Retirees Club. And they are in the process of selection of a computer system for the Retirees Club, and Dr. Price is trying to referee that exercise. I'm very pleased and honored to present to you Professor Emeritus Dr. G. Baley Price.
Well, I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to come and talk with you as a person who was involved in a lot of these early activities. I'm very fond of talking about them, as most old soldiers are, I guess. Somebody is credited with having said that old soldiers never die, they just fade away, probably in the process of talking about their past exploits. I'll begin back at the beginning and tell you something about how I gradually learned about computers. I received a PhD in mathematics in 1932. In that process, I learned nothing about computing at all. I was familiar with 4- and 5-place tables of logarithms and trigonometric functions. And that's really all I knew about the tools and possibilities of computing. Things began to happen, though. In 1936, I saw a demonstration of Vannevar Bush's differential analyzer. He was an electrical engineer, and he built this machine at MIT. It was an analog machine. It took about a half a dozen people in addition to operate the thing, but it would solve differential equations, something great and wonderful in that day. But in 1940, the state of computing was about as follows. There were slide rules. I brought along a couple here. These are museum pieces. This one, real simple. You could buy that for about $1.50. The other one that I have is considerably more complicated. This one was a log duplex, all kinds of fancy things on both sides. That was they're analog machines, but those were a very important part of computing in 1940. Also, in that day and time, if you look at the world as a whole, the abacus was a very important computing tool. This is a modern one. This one was bought in Tokyo about 5 or 6 years ago. You usually have to be really skillful to compute very much with that, but the Japanese and others could do it. Another important part of computing in 1940 were tables. I have 2 volumes of 15-place tables of the probability function. This one, volume 1, is dated 1941. That's getting up to modern times. This one, volume 2, still on tables with probability functions, dated 1942. 15 place tables. And you needed those if you're going to do computing in 1940. But things began to change even in 1940. In June 1940, I saw a demonstration of the Stibitz Mark I. The Stibitz Mark I was called a complex number calculator. It was made out of telephone relays. It was installed in a room at 463 West Street in New York City, in Bell Telephone Laboratories. The input and output was simply a teletypewriter keyboard. And since that was true, you didn't have to have the two together. You could connect them over a telephone line. So when the mathematicians met in September 1940 up at Dartmouth, they took the keyboard up to Dartmouth and connected it to the computer in New York City over a telephone line. And you could sit there at Dartmouth and add, subtract, multiply, and divide complex numbers on a computer down in New York City. That was a remarkable historical event. I'm told that there's a bronze plaque on the wall of that room to mark that occasion at the present time. So things are beginning to change. That's about where it stood in 1940. From 1943 to 1945, I was a member of the Operations Research Unit at Headquarters 8th Air Force in England. That was a big Air Force. I guess many of you aren't that old. That was quite a lot ago. That was a big Air Force. It had probably 300,000 men and women in it. On Christmas Eve, 1944, we sent out 2,000 heavy bombers with appropriate fighter escort in addition. To give you some idea of the size of this Air Force. And we were the I was part of the Operations Research Unit at headquarters. Incidentally, Operations Research was something completely new. It was something that came out of World War II again. When they asked me to take the job, I said, what do you want me to do? And don't know anything about airplanes. They said, Operations Research. And the only answer I could make was, what's that? Because I literally had never heard the term before. We're a big outfit, probably 80 or 85 people at maximum. We had a lot of special subgroups. I was assigned to do bombing accuracy, not damage, just pure abstract accuracy. And the work, of course, was statistical in nature. If you're doing statistical work of that kind, you would expect to compute some standard deviations. We didn't have enough computing power to compute any standard deviations. We had to settle for mean deviations. You just add up deviations and divide by the number. That's much simpler. Now, for $25, you can get a calculator with a standard deviation key on it. That's nothing at all. I'm trying to give you some idea of computing back in those days. I had a slide rule like this to help me with my work. As I said, we were a big, important Air Force, but the tools that we had in the computing direction were crude in the extreme. I really had a slide rule just like that I used. We had some simple desk calculators, little Monroe calculators with small keyboards. In the whole outfit, 80 or 85 people, we had one Frieden desk calculator with automatic multiplication and division. Remarkable machine. Slow, grind away with a lot of gears and things in there. It was noisy. Finally, it would come out with an answer. I'll give you one more idea of how computing has changed. That Frieden with automatic multiplication and division cost about $750 in 1940 dollars. And since the inflation factor from that day is at least 10, that means in present day money, it would cost about $7,500. But for $7,500, you can get something close to the top of the line in the new PS2 system, a Model 60 or a Model 80, something of that sort. They'll compare a machine that has automatic multiplication and division with the kind of PS2 Model 60 or 80 that I'm talking about, and you see what's happened to computing. They cost about the same amount. I was sent back from England in, actually in May, to attend a conference down in Florida. That's May 1945. And in June 1945, I was sent on a trip up to MIT to report on some of the work. And on that trip, I saw the Aiken Mark I. The Aiken Mark I was a monster made out of stainless steel and plate glass. It reached from about here to that wall over yonder. Strictly mechanical machine. Had a 2.5 horsepower motor to make the wheels go around. And there was a typewriter at the end of the process, and every once in a while it would type out another digit. I think it spent its entire life computing tables of Bessel functions. You can see it too. It's in the Smithsonian in Washington now. It's still available. But that's 1945. We're making progress. About the same time I met William Shockley. I guess William Shockley is entitled to mention, at least in connection with computers. Things have really changed as a result of some of his efforts. The effects of World War II were remarkable. It was one of the most creative periods that you can imagine in the world's history. The war provided the motivation. The war also provided the funds that were necessary to carry through a lot of developments that were just ready to happen. Out of World War II came the computer age, the nuclear age, the jet age, and the space age. That's a lot to have its origins in one little 5 or 6 year period. The first electronic computer was also started during World War II. That happened at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, the Moore School of Engineering. There was one person that played a role in that development that I've known for a long time, and that was Herman H. Goldstein. If you read the history of that period, you'll inevitably come across his name. And in 1946, that machine was completed. It was called the ENIAC, and it's worth translating that name for you. ENIAC stands for Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer, and the name says something. That machine was thought of as a machine for solving mathematical problems. You see there's a pair of words, numerical integrator. That's calculus, that's mathematics. And they put that name on it, and it emphasizes that they didn't understand at all what they had done. IBM looked at this thing and said, well, there's no future in that. The world wouldn't need more than 8 or 10 of them, and no point in getting into the business. But you see, the name indicates that they didn't realize what they had. It was a machine for solving fancy problems in mathematics. And it was only later that they began to talk about data processing, which is something very different. And it was much later still that IBM coined the phrase personal computer. That changes the attitude toward the whole thing once more. So the names have played a role. Out of World War II, you also had some trained people with experience that turned out to be important leaders. Two of those that I can name for you are John Kemeny and Richard Hamming. Now, I've known John Kemeny and known him quite well since about the middle of the 50s. I was on some committees with him. We spent a lot of time together. And I didn't know Hamming quite as well, but I heard him speak a number of times, and I had some knowledge of Richard Hamming. And I never understood John Kemeny at all, because he got a PhD from Princeton University in mathematics. In fact, he was a specialist in logic, which is a very rarefied field of mathematics. At one time, he was assistant to Einstein. And I just didn't understand how a mathematician with that kind of background was inventing basic up at Dartmouth. Because he was one of those that played a key role. And that was always a puzzle to me. I just didn't understand it because inventing basics seemed to be out of character somehow. And it was not until 1980 that I got the explanation of the puzzle. During World War II, both John Kemeny and Richard Hamming were computers at Los Alamos. I mean, these lowly people that punched the computing machines. John Kemeny didn't even have a bachelor's degree at that time. He really got started early. So that out of his war experience, he learned the importance of computing. And when the computers finally became available, he joined in and played a very important role. I saw the von Neumann machine at the Institute for Advanced Study while it was under construction. Another thing that came out of World War II was the Office of Naval Research and the National Science Foundation. Science had played such an important role during the war that the government thought it was quite necessary to try to take advantage of similar developments during peacetime. And the Office of Naval Research was set up in 1946 and the National Science Foundation in 1950. You probably don't see that there's any connection with the beginnings of computing at KU. It's coming, just wait a moment. Let me talk about what was happening on this campus in 1955. I had had enough background, enough associations with computers and computing, the need for computing, that by 1955, I thought the Department of Mathematics ought to be doing something. So in 1955, I arranged a 2-semester course in numerical analysis. You'll find them in the catalog for 1955, 1956. We didn't have a staff member to teach it, but I arranged to have a member of the Midwest Research Institute in Kansas City come to the campus on Saturday morning, and he taught these two semesters in a 2-hour session on Saturday morning. So we made a small beginning. That was UDL Luke who taught the courses for us from Midwest. But there were beginning to be people on campus that needed machines and were using them. I'll name 2 of those for them. Charles Weinog was a professor of petroleum engineering. And by 1956, and that's 55, 56 I'm talking about, it had been discovered that if you did a certain amount of computing with an oil pool, you could get a lot more oil out of the ground than if you just ignored it and drilled a bunch of wells. There was no machine on campus, but he had enough connections with some of the big oil companies that he had access to some big computing machines in Houston, Texas. He could go down there and get time on machines. And another person was Robert Sokol. Now, Robert Sokol was professor of systematics and population biology. Sounds a long ways from computer machines, doesn't it? But he was developing, using computers to develop methods in numerical taxonomy, mathematical and numerical ways for classifying all kinds of things. He started with biological specimens. You can see that there are possibilities here because you can distinguish the insects from the spiders by simply counting their legs. The insects all have 6 legs and the spiders all have 8 legs. So that's a crude beginning. You can extend the numerical methods far, far beyond that. And so there were needs on campus. Sokol, I think, was getting access to a machine over in Illinois somewhere. He had some friends or some connections over there. And there, at that time, 1956, there were a group of people on campus that were saying, we need one here. The only stumbling block was it took money to get one. And nobody could see where we were going to get the money to get one. But we heard about a small machine that was built on the West Coast somewhere that, well, maybe if we were lucky, we might get enough money to get one of those. Well, just hold that for a minute. In the spring of 1956, I was a visiting lecturer for the Mathematical Association of America. Now, I mentioned the National Science Foundation. It had been set up in 1950, and the National Science Foundation was trying to promote the teaching of mathematics throughout the United States. And one thing it did was to give a grant to the Mathematical Association of America to provide these visiting lecturers that would go around and visit campuses, talk with students, talk with faculty members, talk with deans, talk with all kinds of people, to try to push the study of mathematics along. Well, I was representing the Mathematical Association of America. I was not a representative of the University of Kansas, but I noticed that every time they introduced me, they said I came from the University of Kansas, and I had an opportunity to talk with students. And out of this, one of the things I gained was graduate students for the department, which we needed quite bad. Well, in the spring of 1956, I visited 28 colleges and universities. One of the most strenuous things I ever did. In some ways, it was harder than the war itself. When you start giving 4 or 5 talks a day, day and night, day after day after day, it gets hard. Well, I ended up my last trip on the East Coast, really up in New York State, but I came down by Washington because there were people in Washington I wanted to see. And one of the persons that I went to see was the chief of our Operation Research Unit in the 8th Air Force. In the meantime, Eisenhower had appointed him a member of the Supreme Court. Well, I haven't known very many people on the Supreme Court, but here I was in Washington, and I'd learned how to pay him a call over at the Supreme Court building. I went to see him. He was a very distinguished lawyer. And he said, look, the Supreme Court's going to have a session, public session, about noon today, and I'll be glad to get a ticket for it, and you can attend this session, see what goes on, what it's like. I said, gee, I would just love to do that, but I've got an appointment to see my friend Leon Cohen over at the National Science Foundation. And I think it's very important for me to keep that appointment at the National Science Foundation. So I passed up my only opportunity to attend a session of the Supreme Court in order to talk with a mathematician or with the National Science Foundation. But when I went over to see Leon Cohen, he said, you know, the National Science Foundation is making some grants to help universities get computers. And he told me all about it. He said, our advisory committee is going to meet in about 3 weeks' time, and if you'll get a proposal in, I think I could get you some money to help buy you a machine. Well, I returned to Lawrence and gave this information around, and we all got real busy. In about 2 weeks' time, we had a proposal in asking for some money to help us buy our first computer. We still were thinking small, you know. But at this point, Dr. Murphy, who was chancellor at that time, got interested in this activity. And I've never known whether he was encouraged by the prospect of getting some money from the National Science Foundation, or whether IBM salesmanship played a role in this. But in any case, instead of proceeding with plans to get this small computer from the West Coast, I've never known, but in any case, KU signed a contract for the purchase of some IBM equipment. I'd like to read you what we ordered. The first order called for an IBM 024 key punch. I don't know whether you still have key punches or not. But before this installation was actually installed, the 024 key punch was changed to an 026 key punch. But then there was also an 077 collator and an 082 sorter and a 402 accounting machine.
We still have all of those.
Well, I gained a little experience with the accounting machine, even at the 8th Air Force, because right at the end of the war, we discovered that there was an outfit, statistical control on our base that had something like an accounting machine for inventory purposes. Well, you can program those things by rewiring the boards. and they could rewire the boards to do some work for us. But that happened so late that it really played no role for us. It came too late. But when I returned from Washington, they gave me about a 50-pound carton of punch cards to deliver in the Pentagon. So I learned about heavy data. I suppose you could put off everything that I had on a few floppy disks now. It would be easy to carry in your pocket. Well, in addition to the accounting machine, we had a 514 reproducer, a 552 interpreter, a 533 card reader, and a 650 console unit, and a 655 power unit. Well, this building didn't exist in those days. We had to put it somewhere. And Dr. Murphy arranged that the equipment would be set up in room 8C in the basement of Strong Hall. The room is still there. It took a lot of changes. You had to put some window air conditioners in. And for at least 2 of these units, you had to put hoods over them with ducts going out the window and fans to blow the heat out, because at least 2 of these, the console unit and the power unit, produced a lot of heat. They were full of vacuum tubes. And you just had to collect it and blow it out the window to try to keep the place cool. So the machines were set up in a hurry. Room 8B was used for office space for the director and whatever assistant he had. So these 2 little rooms in the basement of Strong Hall were the whole thing. Well, now we've got an installation, an IBM 650 installation, and nobody on campus knew how to run it. But luck was with us, because before this installation had been completed, I'd had an application for admission to graduate work in mathematics from a student named Peter Patton down in Wichita. Now, as it turned out, Peter Patton had just completed a bachelor's degree at Harvard in January 1957. And while he was at Harvard, he learned about computers. And I knew about his application, knew it was coming in. And so when we had this installation about complete, well, in the meantime, Peter Patton lived in Wichita, and he graduated in January. He wasn't going to start graduate work till September in those days. And in the meantime, he was working for Boeing Airplane Company in Wichita. And I knew all of this. And I said to Boeing, why don't you lend us Peter Patton for the summer to help us get started with our computer, and we'll train some people, and maybe some of them will work for you later, so it'll be good for tat. Well, they said, it's a little bit too much to lend him to you for the whole summer, but we can make an arrangement on this, and he might come up for a week to get you started, and then come back, say, every weekend or one day during the week to keep you going during the summer. So everybody approved this. Boeing approved, and Dr. Murphy approved, and so in about the first week of June, we advertised the first short course on this campus. And we distributed information all over the campus, because by this time, quite a lot of people were beginning to be interested. And about 80 people signed up for this course. And about 70 of them actually took the course, and about 60 of them completed the course, and we gave them all the tests, and about 30 really qualified to operate the IBM 650. So we're in business. We've got a machine. We've got a lot of people on campus now that know how to use it. Well, that was only the beginning. And you might think, you might hope that you've got everything set up and taken care of now for 5 years or something. But as it turned out, almost every time you install the machine, you immediately start to work on selecting the next one. And that's about the way it went. The IBM was set up, as I've said, in room 8C in the basement of Strong Hall. And that was known to be temporary when it happened. because Summerfield Hall was being built about that time, and they designed space in the basement, in the center of the first floor, I should say, to accept this installation. And in 1959, 2 years later, the 650 was moved from Strong Hall down to Summerfield Hall. The space was still small, but it was a bit more adequate than it was up in Strong Hall. The next machine was an IBM 1620 magnetic tape system, and it replaced the IBM 650 in September 1962. Maybe that 650 was the most durable of all the installations we've had. It did seem to last 5 years. But that was partly, I'm sure, because of the difficulty of getting another machine. The computer builders regularly advertised and signed contracts to deliver for equipment that they had not built, and in many cases had not even completed the design. So you'd sign a contract for a machine to be delivered at a certain time, and there nearly always were long delays. And that happened, I think, with every one of the machines in this period. In any case, the 1620 came in September 1962. The committee immediately went to work to get the next one. And in fact, the IBM 7040-1401 system was installed in Summerfield Hall in July 1964. 2 years, you see, that one lasted. And that really required a move, because the 7040-1401 was a much larger system than the 1620. And I was chairman of the committee at the time. We had no department, and there was just a committee that tried to manage things on campus. And it fell to me to look for a place to put that new system. It would not fit into the space where the 1620 had been located, not at all. And I got quite a tour of the campus out of that. At that particular time, they were building the addition to Strong Hall on the east end. And Keith Lawton and I toured the campus, and he took me over to see that. That was one of the largest holes in the ground I think I ever saw in my life. You know, it's just now filled with book stacks from the sub-basement all the way up to the top, and there was all this huge open space, but that was not the place to put a computing machine. And some of the people in engineering were quite anxious to have this machine installed in Learning Hall, because Learning Hall had been built by that time. And they said, we've got a lot of space under the west end of that building. Mr. Lawton and I went over and looked at it. It had a dirt floor. It had a wind tunnel installed down there. It had the foundations for the big testing equipment up on the first floor. You know, the engineers want machines to test beams. They put them in there and put them under pressure until they break to find out how strong they are. And the foundations for all that big heavy equipment were down underneath down there. Well, it's completely obvious that you couldn't put fancy electronic equipment that needed special air conditioning and special dust-free environment. That certainly was not the place you were going to put it. Well, we looked and we looked and we looked. And there were two very nice rooms at the east end of the first floor of Summerfield Hall. And they had been specially designed for a secretarial training program that was on the campus at that time. I think it belonged to the School of Business. And the big room on the north side of the corridor had special desks for typewriters and secretarial work, and the room that went with it on the other side. The room had just been finished, you see, shortly before that, with all this special equipment, special arrangement for the secretarial training course. I was forced to go back to Provost Surface, who was in charge of this campus at that time, and say, that pair of rooms looks like the place we ought to put this computer. Well, what about the secretarial training program? Well, I guess you'll have to move that out, but that's another place. And that secretarial training program was moved up, I think, to some temporary buildings behind, that still existed, but behind Strong Hall at that time. And we took the room on the north side and put in a raised floor so all the cables could go underneath, put in a lot of special air conditioning to take care of it, and there was workspace in the other room on the other side. So it was pretty hard on the secretarial training program, but we got a better space. That new installation. Well, that installation didn't last very long either. As soon as you get it in, you start to work on the next one. At that point, IBM made a suggestion. You see, we really looked at three different companies that made equipment. We looked at the CDC. They had a great, big, very fast machine, but it didn't have some of the things we wanted. IBM made us a proposal that would have required several steps in a transition, and it looked very painful to us. Transitions were always difficult. And finally, General Electric came up with a proposal and a machine we thought we couldn't even afford, but they made us a very fine offer, and we accepted it. There were very few General Electric installations in universities. One of them was at Dartmouth. Dartmouth did wonders with computing on a GE 225, as I remember. Well, the machine we got was a GE 625 / DataNet 30. And it seemed to have all the desirable features that we had looked for. Expandability and all the other things. And pretty soon it was expanded to a GE 635. There were steps right away. And we signed a contract for that thing, and it took almost 2 years to get it after the contract was signed. Because there were delays, and there were delays, and just time after time. Then in 1976, contracts were signed for the Honeywell and IBM installation. So it would appear that in a 10-year period, we had about 4 different systems. And that was standard in that time. The technology was changing so fast, and the needs for computing capacity were changing so fast that you just were constantly trying to expand. There were grants from the National Science Foundation. There were grants from National Institutes of Health that helped to build all these machines and to expand them. And I should say at least something about the directors. I missed that. During the first year, the director was Urs W. Hochstrasser. He was a Swiss. He had received his training at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. That's the English name for that institute, because the German name, which they like at home, makes it sound like a high school, but actually it's an organization much like MIT. And Professor Hochstrasser had received his degrees there under a very fine mathematician, Professor Stiefel. He visited the campus while Hochstrasser was here. But Professor Hochstrasser was on campus only 1 year because the Swiss embassy in Washington demanded to have him to serve as their science attaché. The university didn't want to give him up. The ambassador was adamant. He wanted the man, and he received a 2-year leave, and at the end of 2 years he asked for a third. The university won't give 3 years of leave apparently to anybody, and so Professor Hochstrasser was forced to resign. He was on campus only 1 year. After he left, Professor Brock was acting director. Professor Brock never learned computing, but he was an administrator that had assistants and kept the installation going. And then Professor Hetherington came, I believe, in 1961. And after Professor Hetherington, there was Mr. Wolf. And after Mr. Wolf, I think we have our present director. So that's the complete history on the directors. Eventually, Science Department, and the Department of Mathematics will teach us some courses in numerical analysis and so on, but we lost most of our connection with computers. There's much more I could say on this subject, but I think I better leave it at this point. If you have questions, I'd be glad to try to answer them. Thank you. I think anybody would be rash to talk about the next 30 years. I am not that close to computers. You probably could make a much better guess on that than I could. But there seem to be changes in the technology. What will superconductivity do to it? That's just one of the things. Seems to me I heard that mentioned on television news last night. And maybe somebody will come along with another development that's as earth-shaking as the transistor was. I haven't any idea. So
That's a fair response. I just curious.
Considering what's happened since 1940, I tried to give you the state of the field in 1940, and in 1940, these things and the tables were still important parts of it. You'd have to be good to do computing on this thing. Not only would you have to know how, but you'd have to have tremendous manual dexterity to manipulate these things. This thing introduces an additional difficulty into computing. Slide rule is pretty easy, but from abacus and slide rule to the present day in less than 50 years, maybe what will happen in 30 years, I haven't any idea.
At what point in time did the computer science department become a department separate from the Department of Mathematics?
I would need to look in that book under your hand there to get the exact date. It's all written down in my history. It's about 1967, though. There was a possibility that the Department of Mathematics would try to include computer science in the Department of Mathematics. The mathematicians didn't want it. I regretted that myself. I was chairman of the department at the time, and I thought the mathematicians should play a role in computing. I thought it was important for the mathematicians. But the machines at that time didn't prove theorems. And one of my friends on campus in statistics and another part of it says he doesn't understand these mathematicians. They seem to be intent on proving theorems, and nothing else works. And if you won't prove a theorem, don't have any use for it. So mathematicians said they thought there should be a separate department. Maybe that's the best way to have it. But I'll tell you one more story in that connection. Through a long period of time, the mathematicians have stayed away from computing machines, as I've explained. But next year, 1988, the American Mathematics Society is going to celebrate its 100th anniversary. It was organized in 1888, 1988. They're going to celebrate. And there will be a winter meeting in Atlanta, Georgia, in about the first week of January. And I've seen the announcement of the plans already. They're going to have a banquet for one thing. That's not very common with them. They're going to have a banquet. Well, at a banquet, it's nice to have a banquet. In a centennial year, it's nice to have some souvenirs. And guess what the souvenir is going to be? I don't think you could guess. But they have made special arrangement with Hewlett-Packard for a special centennial version of the HP 28C, which lists for $235. And if you buy a banquet ticket for $30, you can buy one of these HP 28Cs Centennial Edition for $60 more. So I think the mathematicians are making progress. They're actually going to use this opportunity.
Any other questions?
I got one. These fantastic machines you've been describing and how they've been building them, do you have anything to say in terms of, I mean, they've been doing such great things, is there anything in terms of the future, going down the future, that possibly, you know, these machines we should be wary of, maybe the other side of it? When they do such great things, is there another side to all this advancement that we're doing in computing?
Well, I know there's a great deal of discussion of that aspect of computing. I guess I've never been worried about them myself personally. Maybe I'm too naive or something. I think they've contributed a great deal. Certainly, I think there would be enormous changes in present civilization if somebody suddenly took away all our computers. How would we manage? I don't know. So I guess I haven't worried about that part of it somehow. Weena wrote a book, I think, on that line.
Thank you very much, Dr. Price.